You're listening to Distraction Therapy with Rob Watson. Conversations about how we find meaning in our lives and what it's like to be part of a meta-modern world. Hello, this is Distraction Therapy with Rob Watson, and it's a very pleasant morning here in Leicester, and I'm sitting outside of the coffee shop today with Ryan Clayton.
Hello.
How are you doing?
Very good.
Now, we're just warming up a little bit. I mean that in terms of mentally, because it's a Saturday morning. And, well, I am anyway. I mean, I can't speak for Ryan, but it's...
I'm always warmed up, Rob.
Yes, but the caffeine will kind of start to kick in soon. And we usually start by asking, what have you been up to?
Yeah, I never look forward to this question because it's always the same. I've been reading a lot. Oh, I went to the cinema to see the new Doctor Strange film.
That gives us something to talk about. So I went to see that the other day as well.
Oh, did you? What did you think? Because I thought it was really good.
Do you want to do this now or leave it till later? Is it like a spoiler? Because there will be spoilers.
Oh, that's your call, Rob.
I know. Let's do it now. So, since you're kind of so enthused by it, why did you think it was good?
Because it was just daft.
That was my view when I came out of it as well.
I always love these films a lot more when they embrace a lot of the silliness that comes along with the superhero concept in general, and the fact that you shouldn't really be limited to unnecessary realism. Like, a lot of people say a lot of really great things about the first Iron Man movie, but I'm sort of very not cold on it, but I think it's an okay film. But I think this end of the spectrum, where you get somebody like Sam Raimi, who is just going absolutely mental and doing all sorts of strange stuff with, magicians fighting with musical notes to Danny Elfman's
that was
score.
The sequence, I think, that really won me over. Because that was great, because that was the point where you started to realise that he felt more confident with it was much more comic book in that sense. So you almost expected the zaps and the wows to come out on the exactly. Batman style stuff. So,
and it comes to the same kind of level of like almost like a formalist approach of playing with the form of a film a little bit, because you've got a musical score in all of these films, but in that, to make it then explicit and to have it become an integral part of a story beat which is already quite strange.
That never happens, does it? Cinema doesn't really. Is it extra diegetic and intradiegetic? I think the phrase is diegetic music, and the music is usually contained outside of the narrative and the world of experience of the characters. But this was the point where there was like this crossover between them, and just it was interesting that it picked up. Was it Beethoven's Fifth that it was being mashed up?
Oh, you're more cultured than me. I didn't recognise. Oh my God, yeah, it was, yeah. But no, that's
apologies for anybody who's a fan of Beethoven.
No, but stuff like that is so much more interesting, because I remember, the first Doctor Strange film, where all of the magic is still like they're trying to ground it in something real and in science, and the mirror dimension and all of its like geometry and stuff. And then in this one,
they've just let go of all of that.
Yeah, you just got, well, it's magic.
It was a romp. Yeah,
we can do what we want because it's magic.
Well, we've got these digital effects, and it's like, can we really just use them? And just have fun with them. I thought it was good fun, and I actually thought I can't remember the actor's name, the Red Witch or whatever character she's called. I don't pay that much.
Witch
the Scarlet Witch.
Elizabeth Olsen.
It was great as an antagonist.
Yeah,
I thought that was really an interesting dynamic to go down, which was just this really strong motivation. Obsessive motivation for something which wasn't about taking over the universe.
No.
This was, I've sat through so much kind of fantasy stuff recently, and you get this a lot in Doctor Who. The whole of reality is at risk. It's like, well, where do you go after that in storytelling terms?
Yeah.
You've got to keep it grounded to some degree.
Well, that was what was very interesting about it, because the villain is a lot more interesting because it's a character that you've grown to know over several films, and it's somebody that you care about dealing with the trauma that they've gone through in all of these recent things. So it felt like a crescendo of a lot of storylines that had been going along, which kept it very grounded emotionally, because that's something that a lot of people can relate to, is attempting to deal with trauma and how you face that, but then set across this massive canvas of a multiverse that could, in somebody else's hands be just ridiculous and written off almost immediately, because there's nothing about that that's even remotely relatable.
I think I read some reviews, not many, and they were a bit po-faced about it and said, it's a bit too bonkers. And I thought, you're kind of missing the point. It is, that's the whole point of it. It is, it's taken the comic book aesthetic and it said, can we push this? And can we push it away from realism? There's an element to it which is, you always say the kind of emotional realism. I just found it kind of, at some points, the moments where it turned into, if you like, a zombie movie, were just, and I hate zombie movies, but even I was kind of infused by that. So I was like, okay, you're really having fun with this. And it was done so well, it didn't have to foreground itself, it just kept it moving along.
Yeah.
And it was like a hint.
Yeah, every time.
A knowing look.
Yeah, like every 15 minutes, some new concept is thrown out to be played with and then moved on from again. Like there's that great scene where he gets captured in one of the universes by the Illuminati, and they introduce a ton of characters, and the audience I don't know what it was like when you went to see it, but the audience in my cinema was going crazy, like cheering, clapping, like woo, which I hate, but it was quite fun.
There was a buzz at that point. I don't know why.
Where they introduce all of these characters to kind of like, what's the best way to say it, to like placate these sort of fanboy expectations of they're going to introduce all the characters that we love.
But what I loved about it, and this is a major spoiler, so switch off for a second if you don't want to, you then go and kill them all. And the way that it was like, finally these superheroes aren't omnipotent, they can be dealt with.
That's what I loved about it. It's like they introduced
and everybody
all of
was like, whoa, what's going on? I could see people sitting in the cinema going, oh my God,
like they introduced all of these characters to get a buzz out of everyone, and then immediately they went, no, we're going to kill them now. In really brutal ways, like the bit where Black Bolt dies, where it's like, oh, he could kill you with a whisper from his mouth. And she just turns around and goes, what mouth?
And he kills himself.
And he screams and blows the back of his head open. I just thought, oh, he knows what he's doing.
So why is that touched a nerve? So what's it's in terms of its resonance. So spoilers over now. We won't give any more details away. Wait until it comes out on DVD or wherever. But it's what's resonant about that? Why do you think it took that particular twist and turn?
I think for me,
because you can't describe it as sincere.
No, it felt a little mean-spirited at times, that moment in particular. But I think it was it never strayed away from what I always think is most important when it comes to these, what are essentially popcorn movies. And you can describe a lot of superhero comic book, a lot of them, in the same way. It's popcorn fare in the same sense that it's almost throwaway entertainment. And it never strayed away from the sense of fun that should come along with these characters and these concepts. In the same way that another film that I really loved from the Marvel stuff was Eternals, but it didn't have that same sense of fun. When I was watching this, I never sat there bored. I never sat there thinking, oh, okay, where's this going now? It was always just on to the next thing. And
it's another fairly long film as well, isn't it? It's
well, that was one of the things that I was also going to say. It didn't feel needlessly long, as opposed to like the Batman, which was like 3 hours long and quite dour. I mean, that's a long time to sit in a film that actively wants to make you depressed. But this film felt quite lean in comparison because it was only 2 hours.
I'm trying to find the name because I want to get it right. That's it. The Mike Myers thing on Netflix, the Pentaverate. It seems to have bombed with people. I really like it.
I can't say I've seen it or
really
even heard of it.
It's based on this idea of a kind of an Illuminati type secret organisation, and it's just full of these really gaudy, crass characters that Mike Myers kind of does well. And I think it's one of his best things he's done for a long time. It's full of the basic, the fart gags and everything. And I've only got up to episode 4, I think, so I need to watch the rest of it. And I'm going to sit down and do that maybe later. But it's just again, it was just this kind of ironic but goofy.
Yeah,
that's not the world's worst word to use about comedy is zany. I don't use that phrase, but it's like it's a bit goofy is about as far as I can go to, and it's like kind of okay. It's like it's fun, and I think a lot of people get really serious about these things and expect that there somehow should be some kind of profound existential meaning within it. It's like no, it's just knockabout,
Yeah, I mean, I think there's always a time and a place. Like, I mean, I love all movies. I mean, I feel like we've talked about like Tarkovsky films before in the past, but you don't go, and the majority of people don't go to a Marvel movie. They're not massively successful because they're existentialist art house movies that tell you something very important about the human condition.
100 times the budget of those movies.
Well, yeah, exactly, because you don't need a massive budget to tell that kind of a story. But what's interesting about the Doctor Strange movie in particular is it almost felt like somebody going, okay, well, we've got this massive budget, how can we really make the most of it? Like, how are we going to splash out on these massive visual effects and really make people say, oh, okay, like do things with them that you wouldn't necessarily be able to do otherwise?
Well, is it What Dreams May Come, one of the kind of the Robin Williams film, which was one of the ones that used digital effects, is a kind of paint box, and it had these large sequences in there which were based around it's like one of the first times that Photoshop was used. It was the use of images as a kind of creating a virtual environment, but it wasn't a realistic environment. It was an impressionistic environment. And for me, it was actually a return to that kind of a way of you've got a lot of stuff that is about using fantasy, but in a realistic way, whereas this kind of didn't. And it blended so many different elements that it's very, very difficult to unpick the streams, the threads. What's the fantastical? What's the, if you like, the grounded fantastical? What's the ungrounded fantastical? I'm sure you could come up with a taxonomy of all the variations of how this stuff's used, and then just pushes it through without any break.
Yeah, well, again, that was another one of the things that I liked, and it's one of the things I think is the great strength of the superhero concept in general. Is that it's not really defined by genre in any traditional sense, in the way that, the concept of a detective is. You can place superheroes into any genre and it works. So it's really nice now to see them start to play with, to push outside of the comfort zone and the kind of genre that they created. Like, you've got the really massive, science fiction soap operas playing in, Guardians of the Galaxy. Doctor Strange really lent into the fantastical horror stuff to the point where, it was actually very effective as well as, kids' first horror movie, because there's a lot of stuff in there that you look at and go, well, okay, I'm not sure I'd let my kid see that, but... And now, I don't know, it's such a nice change of pace from the very, colourless first outings of all of these characters.
I think one of the things they've benefited from is the move away from the American supremacy. And it was ironic that the kind of the character that was, if you like, what they call the MacGuffin in the film was this young woman who could travel across the multiverse. and her name was America, which is a Latin name, but it's the fact that it was almost as if it was like a proxy to say we need to save America, and the hero who was saving America wasn't of a heroic nature. In fact, he was the antithesis of that. He was the anti-hero to some extent. Doctor Strange isn't the person. He does the right thing eventually, but he kind of has to be compelled to do it rather than being the person up front who says we're marching into danger because we're doing the right thing.
Yeah, I mean, that was, again, like, he spends a lot of the film struggling with that idea of, what if I'm not the good guy? Because you have all of these other versions of Doctor Strange in all of these other realities that are just really horrible people and are willing to do absolutely anything to achieve...
And you take it as far as you can go to the point where there's no other choice that you can make. And that might just be that you're the one left with the mouldy baked potato in your hand that you can't get rid of, and you've got to eat it. It's like, I'll do a film based around that, passing responsibility. And you get to the point where all you can do is you can't absolve yourself of any responsibility, and you've got to act and step up and do it. And that's that kind of was played out in a number of ways. He tried different permutations of it, and then eventually had to come down to doing one particular thing on each option. That's the interesting thing about those kind of infinite universe movies and stories. And there's plenty of them. There's alternate realities, and the Matrix and everything is they're all predicated on this idea that would you be different, or would you end up just doing the same things over and over again?
Yeah.
If you had the opportunity to either replay your reality or to exist in an alternative reality, what would happen? Back to the Future, is any kind of time travel thing is based on that predicate of what would you do different? What would you be able to do different, or is there some kind of a fate to what you do?
Yeah, well, I'm reminded of one really excellent episode of Star Trek: The Next Generation that I find myself thinking about a lot because I love Star Trek, obviously, where Captain Picard is visited by Q, and it's one of those moments where he's kind of lamenting some of the things, his exuberant youth and some of the things that he did and some of the risks that he took. And Q says, well, all right, let's take you back to the past, do it like the height of your exuberant youth and some of the things that you did and got away with that you seriously regret, and let's see how you'd act differently. And then one of the really interesting aspects of that story is when he says, okay, you've gone back to the past, you've done things differently, as you now see with hindsight what you should have done. And he takes him back to the present and shows him how that would have impacted his life, and he becomes a sort of ineffectual figure that's not moved forward in his career, that's sort of always blurred into the background. And he has conversations with some of the crew, and they talk about how, I appreciate the fact that you want to progress in your career, but you just don't have what it takes.
It's really just a Greek tragedy, isn't it? It's just played out again. These are the same stories, and they tap into that sense of kind of fate and predetermination and external control or shaping of our lives, which we're not in full awareness of or control of. And it's interesting that I've watched the Picard series. I am a bit of a media... I was thinking about this actually this morning, thinking I maybe need to kind of unhook a little bit from media. I've been obsessed with different stuff for years. Maybe it's time to step back from it and stop watching, keeping up with these things and kind of having an awareness of them. But I don't know. It's like the number of hours I kept watching Star... Because my Star Trek: The Next Generation thing, I didn't want to pay for Sky, so I ended up getting it on DVD on Love Film and copying them so I could watch them later on DVD.
I'm not sure you should be admitting that, Rob.
Well, it was like, but I remember, the hours that I took in copying these things and then watching them as well, and then I think a couple of years ago when they came onto Netflix, I was watching them all again, and you end up binge watching them, and you think the things I could have done with my life other than just sitting there watching these.
Yeah.
And that's why I've never watched the Waking Dead, because like there's 11 series of it. I was like, I'm not going to start getting into that.
No. Well, I've always found that, and it came across more by accident than anything, but there's always sort of in my media consumption an element of focus. Like I became obsessed with film when I was like 16, all the way through to like when I was maybe 21, and sort of watched as many films I could get my hands on. I remember most days I would sit there and do nothing but watch 3 or 4 films that I'd never seen before, like back to back, just soaking them all up. And then kind of fell out of love with that because I kind of took my interest with it as far as I could. And now, ever since then, I've been more interested in comic books and reading those. And it's one of those things where I've never been a huge fan of rewatching or rereading stuff unless it's really deeply impacted me in some way. It's always, okay, move on to what's the next thing now? What new story can I fill my mind with? What else can I, pollinate my imagination with?
No, I'm the same. It's kind of you end up with a kind of almost an expectation that you're searching for the novel or the. I mean, I don't know whether I'm fairly basic with my media consumption. I'm not really one. I don't have a collection of art house films from the Japanese art house films from the 1970s or something like that, and nor do I have a collection of Japanese jazz records from the 1970s. And there are probably some wonderful people out there who've got that kind of interest. I'm fairly mainstream in a way. So one thing I wanted to ask you about, actually, it's a good point to shift the conversation, and I've just ordered us more coffee. So,
brilliant.
So we'll be coming in a second. Which is, if there's a project I'm involved in at the moment, or trying to start the ball rolling with, which is to look at developing an arts-based radio station. But what I wanted to ask you, just for, I suppose, a one-person focus group, in terms of
what more do you need,
if you could
Rob?
set up a radio station, what would you? And you've got everything's. It's a blank slate. There's nobody. There's no expectations about who's involved. There's no expectations about following a format. Certainly, we don't care about who the audience is. What would you want to do? Or what would you want to hear from it? What would you want it to include? How would you want it to?
That's interesting.
Do you listen to the radio? Is a good starting point.
I don't, to be honest. Mainly because I never know what radio stations are good. My knowledge of radio is so limited that I feel like if I were to turn it.
So what would you be looking for? What would you want that good to be?
Well, I think, to answer that question, what I would do if I had a radio show,
if you had the power,
if I had the power to sit there and make people listen to me.
Well, you're not making anybody listening to you. Just get over yourself first. It's just on in the background.
Yeah.
We're not expecting that there's going to be an audience for this.
Yeah, I think ideally it would be. It would just be a reflection of the kind of stuff that I'm interested in. So something about comic books I think would be interesting, because there's a lot of discourse that surrounds comics that is very superficial and boring. It's like, oh, this character did this in this issue, and that's like literally the extent of the discourse. So I think it would be quite good, if you had like a show where in which
we don't do shows.
Radio.
There's no. I mean, this is the thing. Take every preconception that you have about radio and put it in the bin. So if you don't have a show, typically I'd say there are programs,
right?
Things that you construct, artifacts that you collect, and put them into some kind of order. But the idea that it might be a show has a load of baggage with it in terms of presentation and format and things like that. So even going as far back as ditching those kind of things.
Well, one, I'd like to hear some more interesting music, because I feel like a lot of the music that you hear on the radio is, top of the chart stuff. I'd quite like to hear some interesting, like, long form prog music that no one's ever heard of, like 20-minute concept songs, like, you know, science fiction soap operas played out in the kind of like abstract emotionality that music allows. Yeah, and also just people talking about comics. Prog music and
24
comics.
hours a day.
That's what I want. Yeah, 24 hours a day of people talking about comics and stupidly long prog music that nobody listens to.
So you put the record on and then you come back to it half an hour later. It's like, what? I mean, there's a lot of that sounds like podcasting. Is that See, I have this issue about people kind of... there are some really good... I mean, I basically for this idea, ripping off Sound Art Radio, who people will be listening to us from this discussion in Totnes, and then also stations like Resonance FM. There's a few online stations that I think are really good as well, and Threads and Melodic Distraction. And it's kind of looking at how you use the medium in a creative way in itself, rather than as a formulaic... I'm not, it would probably have to include certain things that are scheduled at certain times, but how, it doesn't have to be, and it can be open to, because the technology's changed now. The variety, the ability to put things into a sequence via online scheduling systems are so much easier than they ever used to be. The only thing you've got to do is occasionally, on a regular basis, let the listener know which station that they're listening to. But everything else can be open and flexible about that, and it doesn't have to follow any kind of a set pattern. But that seems to be, podcasting was interesting for this, when it kind of first started, in terms of how people were finding the way around that, and in terms of using different approaches and different types of formats for engaging with people. So I listen to a lot of podcasts which are discussion and, if you like, forum-based discussions, and I think that's perfectly valid as a way of either reusing them or setting them up in the first place to be something which can be broadcast. What's the difference these days between something which is broadcast on the, from a single transmitter to a geographic area, and to, if you like, point-to-point IP data-based individual media that you access via your phone or something like that? Can we play with that?
I don't know.
And what kind of back to what kind of comics and prog rock records? I wasn't expecting such a blunt answer.
Well, I think when it comes to playing with the form of radio in particular, I feel like I've not listened to enough radio to be able to correctly identify what the interesting elements are of the form. Because if you're going to play with the form of something, it would have to be the elements of the form that make radio unique. So perhaps the idea that, radio is something that, like you say, is on in the background, like you're driving somewhere and you turn the radio on in the car and it just comes up, and then you can tune in the middle of the song and you turn it off when you get where you're going. So, I mean, you said something last week, or not last week, whenever we last did one of these, that was really interesting. The idea of, what's the word I'm looking for? Not computer generated, but like algorithmic, kind of like processed, like put in a bunch of sounds,
generative,
put in a bunch of sounds, like music samples and stuff, and have like an algorithm like play with those elements to the degree where you could have like years of music that is algorithmically generated, so you could tune in at any point and never hear the same thing twice, and it just shows up in the background. I'm thinking of like interesting artists that like do that same kind of thing, that sit around. My friend recently told me about an interesting artist called Burial, who in his first album in particular, I think, took a bunch of like sound samples and soundscape recordings from around London when he was on the tube walking the streets, and mixed them together into a kind of atmospheric music that captured what it felt like to be in London. And there's like an intense loneliness to some of his tunes, because it's just one guy walking around on his own through London. I think something like that would be quite interesting.
Well, that idea comes from the work at Sound Art, which is Skylark Radio, which plays out over Dartmoor. So which I'm yet to experience. So I'm dying to get up there to go for a walk in the moors, to take my FM radio with me and tune in, and it uses those generative techniques, so you don't get these repeating patterns. It changes it, and Lucinda can definitely explain it much more appropriately than I can. Yeah. But I think what's interesting is, in music, I think there used to be a thing, I don't know whether it's still a common thing, Cohen music, Koan, which was about that idea of taking elements and then having them to recycle, cycle through different patterns, and the variations of these patterns can be generated. 4 tones can generate 8 hours worth of music or something.
Something else that's also occurred to me that I think might be interesting is because the way that I interact, I love poetry, but the way in which I interact with poetry, because I know very little about it, is I'll tend to find a poet that I think is interesting and buy just a book that contains some of their work, usually like a selected poems or complete poems of, Robert Frost, E.E. Cummings, Wilfred Owen, whatever, and flick through the book kind of reading just the random poems that catch my eye, and occasionally you'll come across something really good. So I think maybe the idea of like setting in like a 2-hour slot or whatever, just to have like a bunch of poems queued up that have been read out or recorded, and then just mix them up totally at random, so you tune in the car and you never really know what poet or what poem you're going to stumble upon. And it's constantly changing. So one moment you'll hear some First World War poetry by Wilfred Owen, and you think, wow, that's really quite impactful. And then all of a sudden, bang, next poem is something by E.E. Cummings, although I'm not quite sure how you'd record some of his stuff.
Well, you could do some dada.
Yeah. But, something like that element of like...
So it's introducing the notion of the poetic. And this is one of the things I think, a lot of radio... so you change it from the nature of radio and our cultural expectations about what radio is, into something which is creative expectations about sound experience. Yeah. Because it's a medium in sound, but then you introduce another element to it, which is it's a poetic experience. So what do we mean? What is that poetic experience? And there's an element to poetry which can be linked across lots of different creative forms. The poetic imagination is that element of intuitive engagement with the world, and an expression literally in poetry in words, but it could be the poetic imagination that is expressed through visual arts or through music, or so there's these things of exploring this on the basis of saying, actually there's something comes from this which we cannot indicate, because the hardest job with this, I think, is to kind of say, well, people will ask constantly, well, what's this about? What's it for? And it's like, I can't tell you. You've got to sit and experience it, and you might not like it, or you might like it, or you might get something from it, or you might not get something from it. We can't control that, and that's quite radical for people in radio terms, to turn around and say, this is why one of the hardest things for this is who's the audience. So I've absolutely no idea.
Well, you'll either find one or you won't.
Yeah, I mean, there'll be a mixture. I hope that I'd be able to put together a kind of mixture of things. So on the one hand, you would do things which you'd schedule and you'd have key times for it, rather than maybe just there's our coffee. Thank you.
Thank you.
I just there are advantages to modern technology of being able to just order online and get it brought to the table. That is
nice.
Better. So what was my train of thought? Yeah, they're just trying to explore and going beyond prog rock and discussions. What kind of discussions? So having a discussion, how would you feel if you were having to chaperone, moderate? I'm trying to find the right word. Facilitate a discussion. How would you feel? What would you want to listen to as a kind of an engaging discussion?
Well, I'll tell you what I wouldn't want to hear. Because one of the things that's always really annoyed me about radio is particularly the presenters and their overly false enthusiasm for pretty much everything. It's loud and it's obnoxious. I think what would be more interesting would just be a couple of people sitting down and having a chat about something in a way that isn't overly manufactured or scripted. These conversations I think I quite enjoy. I think it would be quite good if you just got a couple of people sat down in a room and you gave them like a prompt or something. I don't know, you made them read this. They come from like different backgrounds, could be 2 people, could be 5 people. You gave them a prompt because they all come from different backgrounds. They'll all react to that prompt in different ways and see what kind of ideas that sparks and just have them sit there. It's like
a reflective exercise, rather than. I think you're right. One of my criticisms of radio is that there's a what's the word I'm looking for? Surefooter. How do you pronounce that? Is like there's just too much personality out there, and everything's dependent on somebody's. Hey, I'm best friends with this, and I went and saw this, and I did this, and aren't I wonderful? And I'm your. There's an archetypal role. Something I've wanted to write for a long time, which is about archetypal roles within radio, and particularly as they're applied to community radio, because there's a lot of people come to community radio and think that they have to imitate those roles that they've heard on Radio 2 or Capital or Smooth or something like that, and actually you don't. You can facilitate something completely different. Yeah. But the archetype of the personality, the best friend, the font of knowledge, it's run right the way throughout radio, and it's artificially created.
Yeah, because I get the impression that whenever you listen to these things, everybody's trying so desperately to come across as somebody that you would like.
You would idealise.
Yeah. I want to hear somebody on the radio that I wouldn't like.
Tune into LBC. There's plenty of people on there. They have a good selection of people.
Somebody that has absolutely no personality. That would be fantastic.
Well, that's an opening for me.
Yeah, just get somebody to sit there and drone on in a very misanthropic, pessimistic sort of way.
And that's the interesting thing. I mean, that's the interesting thing about the poetic, because, and really until we've lost that common culture of listening to the spoken word. You get it on Radio 4 and Radio 3 are probably about the only places that do it, but they've started to do it. They've compartmentalised it. I don't feel it organic. I feel it's a bit forced in terms of the way that they utilise those voices, and it becomes a bit more, you're keeping some good actors in work by giving them these little voiceover jobs reading poems. There's a programme on Radio 3, which I haven't listened to for a while, but I used to listen to a lot, which is Words and Music. It used to be on Sundays, and it would be a mixture of poetry and music.
Yeah.
And that was it was good because it was like there was no presenter. There was nobody telling you what was coming up next. There was nobody sitting there saying, reading out. So you listen to the Radio 3 breakfast programme, and they're reading out tweets and messages from listeners, and I'm like, that's why I stopped listening to it, because I don't want to be told things that I'm part of something. I just want to listen to this for itself.
I mean, also, who cares what people are tweeting?
Well, go on Twitter.
All kinds of crap.
Go on Twitter if you want to follow that.
Yeah. What's just occurred to me, I thought would be quite interesting, is if you got a bunch of experts or semi-experts in something, and you told them, okay, next week we're going to talk about this, and they went away and they prepared for it, and then they show up and you say, actually, we're talking about something completely different. You can't use any of your prepackaged talking points.
You can only do that once, really, can't you? But having prepackaged talking points is really fascinating, because most people's media training, when I've worked with academics and things, and kind of industry experts and stuff, is 5 minutes on the local BBC radio station, and you answer, your media training, speaking to journalists, is to say the same thing 3 times in 3 different ways, but you're saying the same thing and no variation away from that. Whereas with community radio, you've got so much time that you can fill. So when we you can listen to long and extended mixes, and you can talk about things. So one of the good things about podcasting is there's no, we're keeping this to an hour because that's reasonable, but we could go on for
5.
Yeah, I'm not there. How much? What would I be like after 5 hours worth of drinking coffee? It's but so that we've got the possibility of changing the format. But one of the things I kind of connect this to, and kind of making it into, if you like, hopefully offering this as a kind of meta-modern aesthetic for how you do it and process for how you do it, is that you change the form. You change the format and the process, you change the meanings. And if you change the meanings, you change the form and the process. So there's something that, one of the things I'd like to do, something which is more emergent, which isn't so predictable, which allows people a bit of space to, even if it takes 16 hours of listening to cows in a field. I'm being horribly narrow in the way that I describe these things. I'm not. I like sound art, but I'm not well informed about them. And I think one of the things, and also for it to form a sense of it being a learning community, that you can use sound and you can use the medium of radio in a way which changes your perspective and the way that you engage with people. I'm trying to figure out how to put that into a license application, because they want to say, well, what are you going to do? Well, we're going to play a load of fairly random stuff that you shouldn't devalue either.
Yeah, I think I think a good mix of stuff would be nice as well. Like if you found, let's say, 5-6 people who were really interested in a bunch of different things, and you just said, all right, you've got an hour to talk about what you enjoy, or just to do whatever with it. You could have an artist who's really interested in using sound as a medium to get things across, or you could just have someone who's an expert in, I don't know, 70,
philosophy, or literature, or
philosophy,
theatre,
comic books.
Cinema,
I wonder who you'd find for that, but yeah, but anything like that. So to the point where you could tune in, and somebody who's really interested in and passionate about something is doing something that they're really interested in, passionate about, because that interest, and especially the passion, is always contagious.
Yeah, that's the you hit on something, which is you bring in a community of people together to share the things that they care about. But what I'm also keen is that it points forward to something new, that emerges from the practice. So you might bring things that you have prior learning of, prior relationships with, but when you put it into the mix of things over time, it will kind of develop into a kind of a different direction. So one of the challenges would be people's preconceptions of what radio and radio presentation and program making is about, but also in terms of preconceptions of what our culture is, which is often highly compartmentalized. So there are multiple cultures, and in a multi-ethnic urban city, often they can get compartmentalized and narrowed down to faith or ethnicity, or other factors. And there are many other ways. I'm kind of, how can we take all of that, mix it all together, mash it up a bit, and then what will it lead to in terms of something that might be new? That there's a kind of more blended experience comes out of this, rather than a resting on what we all already know.
Well, I don't know. You're the radio expert, so I leave it in your
well, I'm
capable
looking
hands,
for. I'm looking for anybody wants to get in touch with me and kind of help me work this through, because I don't want to spend ages thinking about it, or do just want to bang in an application.
Sometimes that's the best place to be. I mean, if you know too much about the process, you just sort of end up falling you just end up falling into those same traps. It's like I'm reminded of something that Danny Boyle once said about making films, and how he thinks that, his earlier films are much more interesting, like, Shallow Grave and Trainspotting, because he didn't know anything about filmmaking. He just sort of set out to make the thing that he wanted to make, and he made it.
Yeah.
Whereas now, when he approaches a film, he's so totally aware of the tradition and how things are done that it's hard to escape that and to do something genuinely new and interesting.
So
which I think is quite interesting.
And that's a really great ethos to your lack of knowledge and awareness and affinity with radio is a great asset, because then as long as you're prepared to say, okay, there's certain things that you have to do it responsibly, and to do it within the law. And however, apart from that, all bets are off.
Exactly, because that's when the really interesting stuff emerges. I think, again, Orson Welles, listening to him talk about the process of making Citizen Kane, it was very much similar. All of the groundbreaking stuff that occurred during that film boils down to, we just didn't know we weren't allowed to do that. You give me these
examples to compare this with, which
the Orson Welles of the next generation, Rob.
I need to get a big glass of brandy and a huge cigar or something, and put on another £400 or something just to compete with that. It's fascinating. So in terms of what do you think? What do you look for? And would hope that you might pick up from in terms of a sense of belonging or community, that this might potentially, what should we be trying to feed into this in terms of getting people involved, and how they operate, how much of their egos need to be parked outside the door?
I think the main thing would simply be, and again, I touched on this earlier, is giving people space to explore things that they're passionate about or interested in, but might not necessarily know a lot about or have explored. Giving people room to grow.
I'm taking a photo. Go on, while you're posing.
Room to grow, room to explore, and share the things that they care about.
That's an interesting word to use, because care is one of those things which is on multiple levels. Is an emergent. This ties in with that meta-modern sincerity, I think, which is care. When you look at what people care about and what people care for, and what people's experiences of, what do you care? If I ask you, what do you care about? What do you care for? That's a real challenge to ask people, I think.
Yeah, that's a hard question.
Well, most radio is on the basis of, we're telling you what you should think about, what you should care about. Have you seen this latest stuff on social media that's going around? These jokes, these stories in the newspapers. Have you, we're so knowledgeable about 1970s, British rock bands or something like that, and it's kind of all, we're so in tune with the latest music scenes. But when you unpick it, you realise that there's a whole industry of stuff there. And then you've got to ask the question, who is actually caring about this? Just because it's on the radio and somebody's telling you that you think you ought to care about it. My personal, I've never cared about Radiohead. So, listening to a lot of stuff with people going on about Radiohead, I just don't care. And I love being able to say to people, I don't care. There's millions of things I don't care about. Yeah. But it's harder to define what it is I do care about. I suppose at this moment it's coffee and conversation.
Well, it's difficult as well, because one of the things that I think is occasionally overlooked is that care is... what's the best way of phrasing this? It's not simply, when you care for something, you're almost you're looking after it. You're interested in it, but you're also sitting there and yeah, it is.
There's listening to John Vervaeke's lectures has been really useful, and the element that I understand from Heidegger, and you can correct me and explain this, is the difference between having and being. So the Cartesian model was about you have certain characteristics, you have a sense of consciousness which fills a function, but that is different from a sense of being and a sense of something where you feel you're if you like fulfilled, or at, it's something which is at the metamodern critique, is that there's something that is absent from modern life, which is we focus too much on having physical things, resources, and we don't think enough about being and those moments and kind of resolving that existential crisis. So it's almost as if you can say, well, having an existential crisis becomes a badge of honour for people because I've got something. I'm pigeonholed now as somebody I've had an existential crisis. Okay, you've had something, but what did you learn from that? How did it transform you, and what have you become in the process of that?
Yeah. Well, it's like intelligence is always a good example, because there's a massive focus on having intelligence and remembering facts and being able to, even in academia, and being able to cite the right sources and rattle off the correct facts, as opposed to the process of growing and learning and discovery.
And being a fulfilled and valuable member of a community. So being rather than having. What tells you that you are a valued member of a community? Is it your status? Is it the things that you accrue? Is it the wealth that you accumulate? Or is it the way that you feel? Do you belong? Are you cared for? Do you care for others? So that's a different set of questions. I mean, ancient questions, but they're a different set of questions than the ones that tend to dominate how we think about things.
Yeah, well, it reminds me of Aristotle's notion of happiness and eudaimonia. It's not just this, it's not a fleeting feeling of joy. In Aristotle's hands, happiness becomes a kind of it becomes human flourishing. You're happy when you're flourishing, and you might not always be experiencing joy, but you're achieving a kind of potential there. You're constantly growing and reaching for something.
And that would be really interesting to try and set up a situation that is the social benefit of what you're trying to do. That's, when you look at something and you're asking the question, not what people to get for it, it's that, I always forget his name, the arts and crafts guy in the 19th century. Never remember it. I've got this mental block about his name. Really important. Anyway, he says, it's not what you get for something, it's what you become. And that idea of significantly, we're going to get blasted out by the street cleaner.
I think we might be, yeah.
We might have to just kind of let it pass for a minute. But I'll record the sound for a second.
Yeah, don't say anything too interesting.
Street cleaner going past, and
very facile attempt at cleaning the street there.
He's got a constant job, hasn't he? It's like it's out 24 hours a day. It's for some people, even when you go to the bin, there's rubbish outside the bin, but not in the bin. We live in a city that just it's like don't get me started. That's I'll save that for when I phone into LBC.
No, well, that was, we're sitting next to the Contemporary. That was what was interesting about going to the Contemporary the last time we were here and seeing I don't know his name, but he'd done a lot of stuff that was like snapshots of Leicester and capturing how it felt to be there in a very real, unmanufactured way. Like a lot of it was made with refuse cardboard and like cigarettes stuck to the bottom and stuff like that.
Yeah, and it's I think for me it's partly about how do we engender a sense of confidence about, we need to dump, sorry to friends who do this, marketing and PR and all that kind of stuff, because it's just soul destroying. And I mean that genuinely from the bottom of my soul, that when you're looking at media that's used in order to sell you something, or it's not part of a creative expression.
No.
It's just purely something which is designed to present something in a way which makes it palatable.
As someone who works in PR, I can fully confirm that to be true.
You know the process.
It is. Yeah, it is soul crushing.
And there's no, it's kind of, maybe it's the world that we live in, and you've got to do a certain amount of it. Like we've got to clean the bins, but I don't want to put it there as the highlight of anybody's life or week. What are you doing this week? Well, I'm flicking through magazines that are trying to sell me just stuff. Now, don't get me wrong, I like design, and I like things that are created and have an aesthetic sensibility which is interesting in its own terms, whether it's mass produced or whether it's. So I'll go into a shop and look at trainers, and I know the culture around that. £300 trainers, but aesthetically they do look interesting. It's a design model.
But what's also interesting about marketing and PR is the kind of insidious stealth nature of it. I know several times as part of my job doing PR, you write these press releases that are designed exclusively so people can sell you something, and you send that press release out to a bunch of journalists, and then that piece that you've written with that intent solely in mind ends up in a newspaper disguised as an article about something interesting, buried on page 5, page 12 or whatever, and it works its way in there. And if you're just flicking through the newspaper, people buy the newspaper to stay informed. But that's not...
It's corrupted the process.
Exactly, yeah.
And the separation between news and press and PR has become...
it's non-existent.
Yeah. So, a couple of minutes left. Anything you're doing this week that you're looking forward to?
Let me think. No.
Well, you've got a pile of books that you're going to work through.
I do, yeah. I've just been handed by you, Rob, a bunch of Philip K. Dick books that I'm interested in.
You got from the
reading.
little library on Foss Road.
Yeah. So I'm looking forward to that. Couple of interesting comic books that I've got queued up to read this weekend about trauma, written by a guy called Tom King, who's an interesting figure because I believe he was part of the CIA and has had to deal with his fair amount of dealing with fairly traumatic wartime experiences, and a lot of that makes it through into his work. I started reading last night the first half of a book called The Omega Men, which is basically a member of the Green Lanterns, basically a space cop, goes into this area of space that they've previously not been allowed into, and he gets kidnapped by a bunch of radicals, and it's all about the violence that's inflicted upon the people by the radicals and by the power structures, and trying to figure out who the real bad guys are, and if even such a label correctly applies, and how the regular people of this star system and all these planets deal with the power games and the violence that's going on around them.
Just read the news.
Whoa.
What's going on in the world? It might be a bit easier to do it in that form. Right. Okay. What's the best way that people can get in contact with you?
I'm on Twitter under @Clayton Comics with an X on the end.
And I'm Rob W Media on Twitter and Instagram, and the website is robwatsonmedia.net. Thanks as ever to Leicester Community Radio and Sound Art Radio, and we'll speak to you soon. You've been listening to Distraction Therapy with me, Rob Watson. Find out more at robwatsonmedia.net, or follow me on Instagram and Twitter @RobWMedia.